Hey friends, want a fun and easy project that's great for beginners? Why don't you try this with me? It is a magical garden that's so fun to make, very meditative and fun. And it uses watercolors and colored pencils and paint pens and Brusho powders. But the last two you don't need. If all you have is watercolors and pencil crayons or colored pencils, you can do this project. So let's get started. Okay, so let's get started. They always say the paper is important, and it is. So today I'm using this fluid watercolor paper. It's a cold press finish. These are 8x8 sheets, and it comes on a little block. And then I'm using my Daniel Smith paints, which is kind of half Daniel Smith and half other things. So the pans I got, the palette, the case, everything. It was called the Daniel Smith Inspiration Colors, and that's the top row there. So they're beautiful colors that are a little bit more, I guess, unusual. And then the bottom row is kind of a mishmash of some other colors I bought along the way. My palette is a mess, but that's okay. It does the trick. And yeah, so that's the paints that I'm using. And finally, I'm going to use these Brusho colors, which are a powdered watercolor I guess paint or pigment or something. I'm not sure exactly what you'd call it, but they're a powdered substance that blooms and creates these really interesting patterns and stuff. So you'll see that when it happens. And I'm putting on, probably it was PBS. I'm doing this as a voiceover because the air conditioning was so loud and it turned out horribly. So anyway, I've got my my little phone there with the news going in the background because I love watching news and different things while I paint. Okay, so now let's get busy getting some nice colors mixed up. The reason I'm mixing them into the palette here, now I'm using the word palette for two things. So we've got the pan palette where the watercolor paints are stored. And then I'm making my own little mixes in the white palette that's just off screen right now. There we go. And the reason I'm doing that is because when the colors, you almost never use watercolor paints full strength. So when you take them out and then add water to water them down a bit and put them in the other palette, you can see much more clearly what the colors actually are. They're so concentrated when they're in the pan that it's not really true to real life what they look like when you mix them with water and are ready to actually use them, or what they would look like on the paper. Often they're so much darker and more concentrated you can barely tell what the color is. Of course, as I'm saying that one example turned out to be pretty much exactly the same color that it is in the pan. But you'll see with other ones that they actually do change color a lot. So I like to spread them out and mix them in the palette so that I can kind of see exactly what I'm working with. So we'll just continue with that. I'll speed things up so that it's not horrifically boring for you to watch, and then we'll get painting. Now, don't all these colors look so beautiful in the little palette there? Oh my goodness. Can't wait to get started. Okay. Check that out. So those are going to be flowers and leaves. And it is going to be so beautiful. Now, this painting is so easy to do. You really are only doing sort of one shape over and over. And so I'm going to start with a nice pink petal shape. And as you can see, I start with the point of the brush and then I sort of press it down and drag it out. So I'm using the thickness of the brush by pressing down. It takes a little bit of practice, but it's quite easy once you get going. I'm careful not to touch the petals to each other because the fact that they're wet, they're going to blend with each other. And I don't want them to. I don't want them to be running into each other. I want them kind of each to stand alone. And then I'll put a center to pull it all together and unite them. And now I'm doing a part that I really love, which is adding colors into the wet areas and letting them bloom and blend, and you can see that they're just turning out beautifully. And basically, I do this throughout the painting a whole bunch of times for all the different petals. And then I repeat the same process and do it for leaves. They're a little bit ran into the other petal, but I'm not too fussy about that. It's a little hint of a color that coordinates and goes nicely. I just don't, if they were all too much touching, then they'd kind of just form a blob. And I don't want that. I want them to look each like, like a specific petal. And then I often concentrate darker dots into the center because flowers typically are darker in the center. And the beautiful thing is there's no real right or wrong here. It's really a chance to play and just have fun with floral shapes, and don't let it, don't second guess yourself too much. Just have fun with it, let it flow, see what you can get, try different things. You can try different shape petals. There's no reason you have to do these kind of, pointy on both ends kind of petals. But it's just a very simple brush stroke to start with. And I do love the way they flow. I think it can create a really beautiful flowy picture. So basically I'm repeating the same step over and over, but just changing the colors up, dotting in other colors to create that, those lush color blends. So I will speed this up so that you don't get too bored. And then I'll talk more when there's more to describe. Okay, that was really fun. It's awesome to see it come together in fast motion like that. So now I'm starting on the leaves, and they're a very similar process, but just not laid out in sort of the star formation necessarily. Now I'm just kind of going into the blank spaces and looking for places I can pop in a leaf shape or sort of a partial leaf shape, because of course they're overlapping and they're doing their thing in the garden. You'll notice on that one green leaf I did there that there's kind of a brownish part, how do you call it, like emerging, and that is a natural part of this particular paint. It's a Daniel Smith color that's granulating. So granulating colors tend to do that. They separate out and show the different pigments in them. So I also dotted in some dark green, so you can see I'm just adding different dimensions. And now I'm going to try this Brusho color stuff, which I'm very new to, and I'm falling in love with it. It's a highly, I guess, pigmented pigment, or I don't really know exactly what you'd call it as a substance, but it's a powder that's intended to You can drop it in like I'm doing, and then you'll see in the wet areas, the water really just kind of takes it and travels with it and makes it flow. And I mean, it's perfect for florals and natural things because it's just got such an organic look to it. So yes, I am just loving this Brusho stuff. So there's an example where I got too close to a petal that was still wet and I had some bleed. I'm not worried about tiny bits of bleed like that. It looks kind of, you know, like how it would look in a garden anyways. I'm not all about perfection, but I just do want to be aware of keeping the areas separate until they dry so that I have control over that. In an ideal world, I guess I wouldn't have green bleeding into the pink and purple there, but what are you going to do? It's not a perfect world, sadly. And so there I'm just tapping in more of the yellow ochre Brusho pigment material. I don't know if anybody knows what you would call it. Let me know. Powder, I guess. It's the obvious thing, but so I'm going to go ahead and speed this up and just, you know, you kind of get the gist, I think, that I'm just finding all the blank spaces and putting in wherever I can. I start with the bigger leaf shapes, and then towards the end, you'll start seeing me just kind of putting in like a little curved line here or a little kind of stem-like thing. You know, it's all about kind of filling up the space with with leaf-shaped things that kind of look like they could be in the background of a garden situation. Okay, so the leaves are done and they're looking pretty darn amazing, if I do say so myself. I'm now putting in centers in the flowers, and I wanted to make sure the petals were like pretty dry before I started this because I definitely don't want a whole bunch of bleed on this one. I really want the center to kind of stay where it is, and I'm dotting it in so that it looks like maybe seeds or, you know, that kind of natural I don't know, texture that you'd see in the center of a flower. And I think that I'm going to call it quits on this one for today because it's looking pretty beautiful. And then once it's fully dry, I'm going to let it dry overnight. I am going to put in some details with some colored pencils and some paint markers. So come back again. You can see that video and see how it turned out.